Hey, Sens fans, welcome to the Senstennial podcast. Today, I am excited to be joined and welcome back to the show, Tim Baines, who is currently covering the Ottawa Senators for the Ottawa Sun. Tim, how are you doing on this
Doing
crazy
well.
trade-filled day?
Yeah, I mean, you can't be that excited to have me on. A little bit, maybe. Yeah, it is. I guess it's an exciting week, and maybe so far a disappointing week for Senators fans.
Yeah, I mean, the first trade of Staios' tenure as GM since what, November, I believe, that he's been in the GM role. And finally, just a few days before the trade deadline, he makes his first trade. And it's Vladimir Tarasenko. I think everyone knew once the results were not there for the Ottawa Senators that Tarasenko was likely going to be one of the main trade chips, or if not the main trade chip that the Ottawa Senators had at their disposal. Now, today they traded with the Florida Panthers and they retained 50% of Tarasenko's salary. In exchange, they got a 2024 fourth round draft pick, which becomes a 2026 third rounder if Florida wins the cup. And also Ottawa also received a 2025 third round pick. So, want to ask you, your thoughts when that transaction came through and you saw the return for Ottawa.
I mean, you see the salary retention, and you got to wonder what the offer was if you don't retain half of the salary. I mean, it's easy to pile on the Senators and the general manager, and I've done my share of that. And again, I think in my column today, I take a couple of shots at them. But you got to understand that when you look to make a trade, first of all, there has to be a market. So we're gonna knock off a bunch of NHL teams. There's not 32 teams that want Vladimir Tarasenko. So let's say we're down to 5 or 6 teams. They're in the market, and then you've got a player who is on a no movement clause, gets $5 million. The team agrees that they will not trade him without his okay. Understand that Tarasenko is from the South Florida area. That's where his kids are. It's where his wife is. He doesn't want to go to, and I'm just going to throw a couple, Las Vegas or Los Angeles. He doesn't want to go to the other coast. So you're probably very limited. A year ago, he agreed to go to the New York Rangers, and the cost of the Rangers, I guess, of note, was significantly more than a conditional fourth and third. There was actually a first round draft pick involved. But I'm guessing, and we don't know the specifics, but I'm guessing his list was very short and maybe only included one team. So if you're Steve Staios, you're going, okay, and I'm sure you want to play hardball, and you're saying, well, if you don't give us a second, you're not going to get him. And then maybe Florida comes back, well, if we're not giving you a second, we'll give you a third and a conditional fourth. And it doesn't seem like a big return, because what are the Senators going to get out of a third and fourth round draft pick? Maybe they'll get really lucky. Maybe they'll get somebody. Maybe they'll get somebody who can play in the NHL, but more likely not. Now, you could also look at it, though. They can maybe turn those draft picks into assets, because you want to think they'll be in contention. We've talked. Senators fans have been of the notion for a couple of years now that this is the year we're going to be a playoff contender again. And I think there was a lot of thought that this might be the year. So they've got a young core. They're going to be, you would hope, a reasonably good team next year. And maybe those assets, maybe they never use those draft picks. Maybe those are assets that they're building. And we'll see what they do over the next couple of days, and maybe next couple of months leading into the free agency. And interesting to watch what they do with Jakob Chychrun as well, who has another year left in his contract. But so to say that, well, why didn't they just keep Tarasenko in the state of Florida? You know what, we want a second, or else you're not getting him, and then just not trading him. Don't know how much that. I think Tarasenko's been a pretty good player for him. I don't know how much that good that does you, though. You're making a stand, and you're saying we're not going to settle for less than what we think is market value. And I think they did get less than market value, but the player really determined where he was going to go. And in a way, you're doing, if the guy's been a good soldier for you and he's been a good guy for your team for the few months that you had him, then maybe you do him good, and deal him where he wants to go, and you pick up a couple of assets, and maybe you just look at it as in that's better than nothing, because obviously they weren't being offered any more by Florida, and obviously the market was narrowed down by where he wanted to go.
Now, for a team like Ottawa, who, seemingly has banked draft capital for a while, Do you think that maybe it would have benefited the Sens more if Steve Staios had maybe been like, okay, well, I don't want to just have a couple of draft picks, a couple magic beans. I want an actual player, like a prospect, even, to come back and instead maybe take the fourth round pick and a prospect rather than two draft picks that Sens fans could actually, see a tangible player there that could potentially help the Ottawa Senators when it comes to next season. Do you think that that's something that maybe, I don't know, Staios did explore that? We're not sure, but is that something that you think would have been better received by fans if they had gotten some sort of
No
player
question,
back?
no question, because the fans don't want to think about a 2026 draft pick or a 2025 draft pick. They want to think that the team is close to playoff contention. So they're thinking in terms of tangible assets, like let's get a guy that maybe can play next year. Maybe will be a good a plug or even a fourth liner for us. Is that more value than a draft pick? Yes. We don't know what they were offered. I would think actually that's probably their preference in the next couple of days would be to get guys that can maybe contribute and to take a roster that I'm not a hockey guy. What do I know? But it sure looks to me, and it looked to me early on that this was a poorly constructed roster. And as good as I think Vladimir Tarasenko has been pretty good this year, it didn't look like a good fit at the time unless you're signing a guy, and he's a former 40 goal scorer. I think he scored 34 a couple of years back. So the guy can put the puck in the net. If you don't plan on playing that guy on your top line, and to be fair, he was playing the top line recently, but at the outset, if you don't plan on, if you're going to pay a guy $5 million, he better be a guy you're going to give a lot of ice time to and play him with your top players. And I'm not sure they did that. I think from the very beginning, they ignored possible shortcomings on defense, and they ignored kind of guys that those third and fourth line guys, and maybe you could have spent that $5 million in the first place more wisely. So a lot of criticism is being kind of leveled at the previous GM, who really left the current management group, I think, in a tough position.
Yeah, and I'll ask you one more on this trade before we move on to some of the other trade rumors out there regarding the Sens. But generally, as I talked about with you before we started recording, Sens fans on social media have been really critical of this trade. I've seen everything from Staios needs to have a senior guy working with him to Staios should be fired to Staios is already worse than Dorian. I've seen a whole gamut. Uh, do you think that the Sens should have waited till Jake Gensel was off the market to help drive up maybe asking or be able to drive up their own asking price and potentially pull a higher draft pick than a third or fourth rounder? Or do you really think Tarasenko, his NTC, and all the stuff surrounding that no trade clause really hindered Staios from making more out of the deal?
There's no question he was hindered. And again, we don't know how many teams he agreed to be traded to, and I would assume it's a very small list, and it may be a list of one. So Jake Gensel is not going to really affect the price from the list of one. If in fact Vladimir Tarasenko said to the Senators, "I will agree to a trade, but I only want to go to one place," and that's a big if, then you're a bit at the mercy of the Florida Panthers, who aren't waiting to see what the price is in Jake Gensel. So it's easy to say, why didn't we wait till Friday and the price would have gone up? If you'd have waited till Friday, the Florida Panthers may have made another move on a winger, and then the market is zero. Again, we go back to the argument, is the return they got for Vladimir Tarasenko better than nothing? And some people would say, well, they should have dug their heels in and said, we're not giving him to you unless we get a higher draft pick. Or you come to the point where, again, if we can pick up a third, and I guess a potential third, that would mean that Florida Panthers would have to win the Stanley Cup this year to get for the fourth to become a third. But again, maybe those are just used as assets. I don't know that Senators so much are looking to acquire a bunch of future draft picks. I think maybe they get into this situation next year. If you've got a stockpile of draft picks, you can be one of those teams doing the buying, and maybe you could fleece somebody and give them a third and a fourth round pick and pick up a quality player.
Totally in the realm of possibility. I'm sure that optimism isn't very prevalent in the Sens community right now, but I appreciate it. um, there have been rumors regarding other players. Erik Brannstrom's one that's come up a little bit. But one that came up more often than not was Jakob Chychrun. And, Staios today in his media presser said that they're not actively shopping Chychrun, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to be taking calls on Jakob Chychrun. And Staios said, if he was on the other side, he'd definitely be making calls on a guy like that. So that tells me that he is getting some calls on Jakob Chychrun. Now, whether he's entertaining those offers, that's a whole other story. But do you think that either Erik Brannstrom or Jakob Chychrun, either one, gets dealt before the deadline on Friday?
When you're the Ottawa Senators and you're the fifth worst team in the NHL and second worst in the East Conference, you can't not take a call. Everybody on the roster should be. Everybody on the roster should be in the conversation. You're not going to go out and shop Tim Stützle, Brady Tkachuk, any of their top players. You're not going to shop them. But if a team calls you and says, we'd really be interested, you've got to take a call. So while they're extremely, extremely unlikely to trade the guys at the top of the roster, Jakob Chychrun's got another year left in his contract. And the Senators have put themselves in this situation with a lot of big contracts early in players' careers. I don't think they can afford to sign Jakob Chychrun. So you've got to decide, are we going to get the best return for him now? Are we going to get a better return in the offseason? Or should we wait and let him play into next year? And are we going to get a better return for him at next year's trade deadline? I think probably the maximum return you're going to get for a player like Jakob Chychrun would be at the end of the season. Unless you're willing to pick up half his contract, which I don't know that there's a big appetite to do, I would think that you're going to get a return. And I don't think the Senators will be, if they do decide to trade Jakob Chychrun. He said he doesn't want to leave. He wants to be in Ottawa. But if you're going to trade a guy like that, I don't think you're necessarily looking at a 2025 first rounder and 2 future second rounders. I think that's when you're starting to look at players that can help your roster. And I don't think you trade a guy like Jakob Chychrun with eye on, we'll take a plugger, an $890,000 plugger, in a future second, and maybe a defense, an up and coming defense. I think you want a significant return of guys who can help you now. And if you're a playoff team right now, you're not looking to trade contributing players. You're looking to trade future assets. So I'm not sure that there would be a fit. But again, good on the general manager for listening. When you're a bad hockey team, everything should be on the table.
And another player who there were trade rumors about, but is now looking like he's going to be missing the rest of the regular season is Josh Norris, who seems to be out again with another shoulder injury. And this seems to be the third significant one in the last couple of years. So, how does that affect the plans of a front office when you have a guy who was previously believed to be a member of the core and now seems to be, moving themselves into the conversation of expendable due to obviously not being able to play up to their contract, but also just the injury history becoming more significant now?
It's great to say a player is expendable, but he's maybe expendable, but you've got to find a buyer. And realistically, he got a big contract based on a big year. 30, and correct me if I'm wrong, 35 goals. Got a big contract, and since then it's been riddled with injuries. So first of all, you've got a guy in a big contract, has one big season under his belt. 35 big season, 35 goals, one good season under his belt. Has had a couple of shoulder surgeries and maybe headed for shoulder surgery number 3. That's a player you're not going to be able to trade. So it's easy to say, yeah, we should get rid of Josh Norris. And you feel for the guy because he just wants to play hockey. And it's tough when you get so many setbacks with the same injury. The wonder, certainly from around the league, everybody around the league can say, well, wait a second, maybe he's going to get injured again. Even healthy, I'm not sure he was living up to that contract. So certainly when a player is injured, when a center is injured, no matter what his salary number is, that's going to be a difficult contract to trade. So I suspect that Josh Norris will be back with the Senators next year, and they're going to, maybe more so, the more of the problem in the offseason, they got to figure out a way to sign Shane Pinto, and that was going to be a problem this year. largely because of the Vladimir Tarasenko contract, that they didn't have enough money to pay Shane Pinto had he not been gone away for half a season.
which I still find ridiculous, but that's a whole other side topic. While we've been talking, it looks like Noah Hannafin has been traded to the Vegas Golden Knights. So that means that with Walker also off the board going to Colorado earlier today, Jakob Chychrun is the number one defenseman on the market now. And I know we just talked about this, but do you think that could potentially change things for the Sens if you now hold the cards with a couple days out from the deadline, the best defenseman that is still available?
If your focus as the Senators management group is to compete next year, is to be a team that with a young core can compete for a playoff spot, you're not looking to pick off probably what teams are looking to offer, which is future assets. You want more than now. So unless a team comes up with a ridiculous offer, maybe a team has a star in waiting in the AHL right now. And unless that's the corner piece of the deal, and I don't have any specific names. There are guys not in the NHL right now who are very, very highly regarded. The Senators aren't going to trade, I don't think, Jakob Chychrun for a first-round draft pick, a second and third. I think they want players. They don't want guys you're going to draft and then wait 3 or 4 or 5 years to contribute to your lineup. Even if they're eyeballing those guys and let's pick up assets and we'll trade those for guys who can play now, I think to trade a player like Jakob Chychrun, I think you need more than now or the very soon to be factor in the deal.
Now, on that note, though, hypothetically, if there's another contender out there who sees Vegas loading up, sees Colorado loading up,
Right.
do you think that maybe they're like, hey, listen, I might have a prospect who's on the verge of getting good NHL minutes? They include that in part of a package. Do you think that then becomes more enticing for the Sens to be like, hey, that's a player who we can inject into our lineup, see what
Right.
they have at the end of this season, and be ready to go for next season?
I mean, that's certainly possible. But then if they're going to say, we're going to give you our top prospect and we'll give you a first rounder, remember that, let's say it's Vegas, and let's say, Vegas just traded, but it's not going to be Vegas. Let's say it's a team that finishes in the top 3 or 4 in the NHL. Your first round draft pick is basically like a high second round draft pick. So how many times do you draft a player at 28 or 29 overall and makes a contribution? So that high end prospect is going to have to be really high end, and it's going to have to be NHL ready. In my opinion, that they will not trade Jakob Chychrun unless they're getting something that can help their hockey team next year.
And, the Ottawa Senators, speaking of first round picks, they have two. They have their own, which looks like it's headed for likely a top 5 pick. And I know you mentioned this in the article that you just released a few hours ago, and you talk about how, even if Tarasenko hypothetically was traded for future considerations, I know you didn't bring up that example, but him not being on the roster as well as some key injuries. If we're talking about slacking for Macklin or celebrating for Celebrini, that might be actually pretty good for the Sens. And then aside from that pick, they also have the pick that they got from Detroit. That'll be the worst of either Detroit or Boston's first round pick this year. Right now, it looks like it'll be Boston's, but is that something that could come into play where Ottawa says, "Hey, we're not touching our own first, but listen, if we can attach hypothetically the Boston first into a Chychrun trade and make it more of like a blockbuster, is that something that's even possible or doable before the trade deadline, or is that something
Well,
that maybe comes up at the draft?"
let's also remember they owe the NHL a first round draft pick, which I think
They
is their
do.
choice, but it could be this year. They're not going to give up. They're not going to give up their own draft pick because it's going to be a good one. But as luck would have it, you not only get Shane Pinto suspended for half a season because of shenanigans, past shenanigans, you lose a first round draft pick. So it really, really hasn't been a good year for the Sens. Not only are they flailing and down near the bottom of the standings, they're also somehow minus a first round draft pick. So as I pointed out in the column, getting worse is not a horrible thing. The Senators aren't going to tank per se, but getting a better chance of getting a first round draft pick is not a horrible thing. It's not significantly better if they finish. Realistically, I think I pointed out the worst they could finish would be third worst. So you move up, you gain like 4 or 5 percentage. It goes to like a 13.5% chance of winning the first overall pick. But the Chicago Blackhawks had the third worst record in the NHL last year, and look what they ended up with. So it's definitely not a sure thing. If finishing with the worst record was a sure thing to get Macklin Celebrini, then I would have advocated that they tank the whole season right from the beginning. No, I really they're not going to do that. Hypothetically, it would have worked in their favor because they get what a player that maybe a generational player. Obviously, I don't want to suggest that they tank. That flies in the face of a lot of it really flies in the face of integrity and a lot of things. So they're not going to do that. But if you trade a couple of players, if you trade a Dominic Kubalik, and Vladimir Tarasenko is gone, and who knows with Brannstrom, we don't know what they have going on. But losing hockey games from this point, I mean, they're not a playoff team. Yeah, if you're a Senators fan, certainly there's disgust and frustration and anger, a lot of things that have been festering for a long time. But I think there is hope on the way. I'm certainly more optimistic in the ownership. I am more optimistic in the management group. And we'll see what they do with a head coach. It's not going to be Jacques Martin next year. I think they need to get somebody in who is going to be tough. He's going to be tough with the young players and have a high expectations. And it'll be that'll be the next interesting decision, an off-season decision.
Yeah. So I was actually going to ask you, do you think that that's something they explore more in the off season? And I guess that's what you're indicating there. I know Staios kind of seemed to shut down the chatter about whether he would bring in a coach
Right.
before the end of the season. So I agree, though. I think it'll just make sense in the off season when you totally know who is out there coach wise that's actually available to bring in.
I think you want to have a pretty good idea going into the offseason. I think you want to have, and certainly there'd be not what's wrong with discussing with current coaches who are unemployed. There's nothing wrong with discussing the opportunity with them. And I think when you see what shakes down because if a coach is going to be fired, it generally happens a day or two after the season is over. You want to act fast because obviously it teaches that teams that fire coaches are also looking for coaches. So I think you want to have a short list going into that. And unless you're convinced that you've got the guy who you have to have, then you wait. But I think you want to pounce. And if I'm the Senators, you'd think they would want to make a decision very, very quickly after the season ends.
Yeah, totally. And there are a lot of intriguing candidates out there, so it'll be interesting to see which direction they take. The last question I want to ask you here is, the Ottawa Senators, they may not be buyers this season. I think that is a foregone conclusion, but there have been some rumors and chatter out there that some young players who maybe haven't totally made it on their current teams or have fallen out of favor with their coaching staff might be available. I know Oliver Wahlstrom's name is out there for the Islanders. Arthur Kaliev has been a name that's been put out there as a guy who's available from LA. Do you think that Ottawa maybe tries to send any of their later, like mid or late round picks, take a flyer on one of these younger guys and give them a shot before the end of the season and see if that's maybe a piece they bring into next year?
I don't even necessarily think it has to be a young player. I mean, there's a reason why those guys fall into favor with their teams, and I'm not sure those guys in particular are a good fit with the Senators, who I think should be aggressively looking, especially for effective third and fourth line guys, energy guys. Maybe Ridley Gregg gives them a little bit of that this year, but I think they need to be better on the bottom two lines, and I think it needs to be pieced together better. The structure of the team needs to be looked at. So I think there were rumors earlier they were in on Chris Tanev, that they were interested. The guy who doesn't, I think it's an unrestricted free agent after this year. I don't know that they'll go after guys who won't be under contract next year, but there's some guys I think available who have some term left on their contract, and maybe maybe teams are looking out clearing some salary to bring in some salary. So I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility, and certainly would not surprise me if they deal some of these assets that they've accumulated or have acquired, and immediately turn around and pick up players who they believe can help them next season.
Yeah, that
But
makes sense.
is it does it make sense that maybe if you can get a player for pennies on the dollar, a guy with a pedigree, with a prospect pedigree, does it make sense to have a look at them? Well, yeah, I guess it depends on the cost. But if you figure that a guy can be a fit, and if you see something that his current team doesn't see, then I think that's certainly a possibility.
All right. Well, there's still a couple days left, so I guess we'll see what shakes out. But obviously, Sens are sellers yet again. Uh, it's tough to see, but that's just the nature of the business. And there's always next year.
Well, the great thing is, maybe next year at this time we'll be having a conversation, and we'll be talking about what prospects and draft picks they're dealing because they're in playoff mode. I mean, the dangerous thing might have been had the Senators been, let's say, 6 points out of the playoffs. They're sitting in, let's say, 12th place in the East right now, and I think we've seen Senators teams in the past. Realistically, we're not a team that could do damage in the playoffs, but because they were close, maybe emerging from the owner who wanted home playoff dates, they would be giving up draft picks when it seemed ridiculous because you knew the team, even if they made the playoffs, which they didn't, even if they made the playoffs, was probably not a team that was going to do anything. But maybe with kind of the allure of a couple of home games, there was a little pressure coming down from the top. So it's good that it's maybe good that they're not, let's say, 7 or 8 points up in the standings, because maybe the temptation would be there to, well, we only have 4 teams to leapfrog to get in, and who knows? But yeah, it is what it is, and maybe next year. We keep saying it every year. Maybe next year. Maybe next year. That's the great thing about sports is it happens. There is a next year.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Maybe some of the assets they're acquiring and accumulating, maybe that'll someday pay off someday soon.
Fingers crossed on that one, Tim.
Fingers crossed. I'd like to
Well,
write positive things next year. I'd like, instead of taking shots at them all the time, I would like to say really, really good things and talk about how far they've come in a year and how it's a model franchise and all of that. But we're not there yet.
oh, well, I look forward to that day. That'll be a good day. On that note, thanks again for your time this evening, Tim. I really appreciate it. And hopefully the rest of the time leading up to the trade deadline continues to be as entertaining as today was, because a lot of trades went down. Now, is
Thank you
there
for
any,
having.
yeah, no problem. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we call it a show here?
No, I got no plugs. Ottawa Sun, Ottawa Citizen on Twitter at Tim C Baines. Um, maybe once the trade, maybe I'll have nothing to write about once the trade deadline is over. Like I hate to keep piling on and talking about how they're the second worst team in the NHL. So no, you find me on Twitter, and again, OttawaSun.com, OttawaCitizen.com, all good. Thank you.
And for those listening or watching, Tim's handle will be in the description, and you can check out his latest article there too. I'll put a link in there, so you can go check out that piece. So, Tim, thank you. Have a good night, and I guess go Sens go. They play late
Oh,
tonight.
thank you.
All right, have a good one.
You too.